introduce you. Uh,
Yes,
Friends, amigos, I have Evie Fredrich with me. She is a sister from another mister. Like, I don't know if you have people in your
for
lives
real.
where for some reason you didn't know you needed them at the perfect timing. Like, this is what Evie is to me. And people that I bring on my show, I like to bring people that bring value and someone I trust. I wouldn't just bring on anybody in here. And Evie, you are someone I really trust. And I am really thankful for you and Matt for your relationship with Letty and I. And I wanted to have you on the show just to chat a little bit, tell us your story and ways that have helped you in your life, good, bad, trauma, and indifferent that have helped you become
Yeah.
the person you are. So
Okay, well,
can
thanks for
you?
making me cry right away. That was very nice. Thank you. I'm just gonna wipe myself on this glass cleaner here. Thank you, Christian. I really do think of you as a brother, for real. Like, we understand each other on the Latino level and all that. Both immigrant children. Yeah, my dad and mom are from Mexico, from Mexicali and Guadalajara. Dad came here under a truck, under a semi truck. Mom came here at a 16, I think, on a visa that she overstayed. Mom and dad became they got amnesty under Reagan in 86. And my mom says that she used her pregnancy with me as evidence that she had been here in the country before the certain time. So she used like her medical. So I helped my parents get papers.
Wow.
And my dad became a citizen. I can't remember when, and then mom's a resident still. And then this is where the long, fun, what I call the mess part of my life, because then everything kind of starts going downhill after that. So they divorced when I was like two-ish, I think. She had me and my brother, then they divorced, and I don't remember. People ask me, like, is it hard to have them divorced? And I was like, I don't remember them ever being together.
Yeah,
Um,
you don't know
but
otherwise, right?
I don't know another way of life. This is them. And then when I was older and I would watch them interact, I was like, how did you guys even get married? I really, they don't have anything in common. I don't understand them at all. And then, so yeah, they divorced and then my mom, then it was like a series of terrible things. Then she had a baby with another person, and then that was my sister. And then that guy was not really nice to us but now he's great. I just think he didn't know how to parent us. And my dad was always in the picture. Dad is a great dad, supportive, encouraging. He would come every weekend, but he was not very stable financially or otherwise. So it was kind of like we couldn't really rely on him to do stuff. Like I think about it now, I'm like, it would have been so awesome if my dad had like gotten an apartment and like had a place for us to be on the weekends, and a place where we could go from mom's. But he didn't really get it together. I don't know what happened. He just like would rent rooms and I don't know what, but he just wasn't. And still to this day, he's not super stable either. But he's such a good man and God fearing, and he's been a positive influence in my life. So then there was the middle one, and then things got worse because then after that guy, she was with another guy, and that guy, they had two kids, and he was abusive and abused me sexually. And it was like 6 or 7, I think, when that happened. And I don't remember. This is a crazy thing about trauma in the brain, how it locks like I have a block of that. I only remember like one incident of that happening. And then I told my mom, I don't know what age, and she confronted him, but then stayed with him. So I don't know if it stopped after that or what, but we stayed with this person until so that was a trauma 2, I guess. And then the third one was when I was about 12, I think. I came home, and after there was 5 kids at this point, and I came home and the house was really quiet, and I knew that something was wrong because my house is never quiet. There's 5 kids. And it was weird because I had a bad feeling that whole day, like something bad is happening or something bad's going to happen today. um, and then I got home, it was quiet, and then when my sisters told me that they had taken her stepdad into custody, and thank God somebody they found out that he was doing that, and then they took him out, and then we got split up the five siblings. My brother and I went with our grandmother and my paternal grandmother and my dad. Middle sister went with foster mom. And then the two youngest ended up in a women's shelter. And it wasn't very long that we were separated. But oh, and here I'll say that a lot of the things that I'll say now, it's like I've processed a lot of this, so there's a lot of like no emotion because it's just kind of I've done the work and it doesn't really, trigger me too much. And also there's a lot of stuff that now you have foresight of, but at the time when all this is happening, I wasn't aware. Like
Right.
I'm not aware that me being taken from my siblings is going to be an instrumental life-changing moment at the time it was happening. Obviously, it's all, what is this, four factors, thought, whatever it is. So the separation of the five siblings caused a dynamic shift that I didn't realize until I was reading a book about um there was probably something about it. There was a moment in your life where everything changed. And that was that moment for me because the dynamic shifted where my brother and I were together. So we were like peers. So we were like together. But my sisters no longer had me and no longer had anybody. And that's when the dynamic started where I was their mom, kind of like I was trying to take care of them. And as a Mexican oldest sister of children, you're kind of always the default mom anyway.
Right.
You're the one that's responsible. And I was born responsible, like out the gate. I don't know how you're born that way. So type A kids. And I was responsible. So I was like, okay, we'll take care of the girls and watch them if my mom had to go to the store or whatever. And then, and sometimes I would stay home from school if my mom didn't have a babysitter. Like I would stay home from school. And so they took the girls and I was sort of I realized later that that's when it hit, when it started, that I felt responsible for them, that I was their mom and I had to take care of them. And I had to unlearn that through work, through therapy, and talking to the girls about it, and how I no longer had to be responsible for them. And like I'll get text messages from them and I would feel like I had to solve their problem. And now I just like, I'll get a text from them and I'll like write a whole big response and then I'll delete it and go, that
I was gonna
sounds,
ask you, do you delete
yeah,
it?
I delete it and I go, that sounds difficult, or I'm sorry that happened to you, or something a little
Yeah.
more like not solving the problem and just kind of trying to, I'm there for like advice and the girls know they can come to me for that, but I had to learn that I'm not responsible for them. And then, so that was that one. And we were separated from our mom for about a month. And miraculously, we heard that it was miraculous that it was only a month.
Hmm.
So then we got back. The court gave us back to our mom after about a month, and
Can I
I missed
jump in
school
real
that
quick?
whole time. Yeah,
How did it feel like a month at the time?
it felt longer, I'm sure. Yeah, like every day was eternally long, and it was like my paternal grandmother and I weren't very close. I was closer to my grandmother from my mom's side. She never liked my mom and I resented that, and then it turned out that she was right. My mom is hella problematic, and I don't think it's like nowadays I've forgiven my mom for a lot of stuff, but that was a big part of the work, was forgiving your mom, forgiving my mom for like not having, the biggest part was like that she stayed with that guy. It was like after everything that happened, how could you choose him over us, was the big part of it. And poor woman, I mean, she grew up poor, the youngest of 10. Her dad died when she was little, and all kinds of bad stuff happened to her, and now and she still, I don't think, has gone through the work of all of that stuff. And so the way she dealt with us kids was there was a lot of anger and yelling and classic Mexican parenting style of just feelings were never talked about. There's no such thing as feelings. There's no such thing as any of that. You're just sort of you just do whatever you got to do. You're responsible and you do the stuff and you know talk about what's going on here.
Right.
And since I didn't get any like affirmation at home with my mom, and she and I had a very tumultuous relationship, but I think she has narcissistic personality disorder maybe, or some sort of narcissism that's probably from the trauma of like she had to worry about only her and the world
Right.
revolves
Her
around her
her
kind of thing.
coping through her life.
That was
Yeah.
her coping mechanism. And 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 so when I was doing, wait, where was I with the
A month, and that's when you realized about the month
yeah, a month
after.
into it, we were back with mom, and then we were uh missed school, and then Oh, because my mom and like I didn't get any affirmation at home. I was like a really good student because that the teachers would reward me. Like they'd be
Oh
like, "Oh,
yeah.
yeah, good job, Evie, good job." And because of that, I got to go. I studied in school. I did well, and then I got to go to college. And again, poor child of oldest of five. My mom was now my mom was a single mom. Once we came back together, now mom's a single mother of five children, on welfare and food stamps. My dad tried to support, the other one tried to support a little bit, but it wasn't enough. So it was like a lot of food insecurity and things like that. Like I remember my mom waking me up and telling me, "There's no milk in the fridge. There's no food. We need to pray
Mm,
that God will provide." And that was one of those like miraculous moments where three checks arrived that day of like to provide. Like it was an incredibly miraculous moment. But it was also like no kid should be stressed out about rent. Like it's not
right.
something that a kid should be
How
worrying
old would
about.
you have? How old were you at that time?
I was like 12, I think.
Okay.
12. And then 12, 13, about there. And then the rest of the time was just remember like I don't think my since my mom wasn't very warm and hadn't dealt with a lot of stuff, all I got was like I learned later that like all her emotions, the only one that I saw a lot of was anger. So
Mm,
even though she was, because as I learned from my therapists, um, was that anger is the feeling that most people are most comfortable sharing because it feels the least vulnerable. So it feels like you're strong and
mm,
you're fighting instead of actually admitting she was hurt. And one of the things I remember when that kind of before I understood what that was, I remember seeing it in action. And it was my brother was moving away, and she said she was really mean to him. Like she was just being real jerky. And just the way she had been jerky with me when I was moving to college. And I was like, you should be proud. Like I'm moving to a dorm. I'm like going to college. It's a Christian school. Like, and it's not that far. It's like driving distance. And she was really mean to me at the end, the last few. I was like, I can't wait to get out of here. Because that was one motivator. When the motivator in my life has always been to get out of my mom's house and to never depend on her ever again was like the number
mm.
one motivator in my life. And I was like, and to so much so that I have recurring nightmares where I live with my mother. And I
Wow.
found out later that one of my sisters has the same recurring dream. And it's just something about you're powerless again, I guess, and you have to depend on somebody. I don't know. But it's that was a big motivator. So I was like, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna get a work. I got a scholarship, I got financial aid, I got a loan and got out of there. And then so when I was leaving, I remember her being really mean, and then she did the same thing to my brother, and I realized she's hurt. She's sad, but she
She
doesn't
doesn't know
know
how to
how to
say it.
like she doesn't know how to say it. She doesn't know how to express it. And she's like, I'm gonna miss you guys. Like it was too much for her. It was like too close to the bone to be like, I'm so sad that my baby's leaving. And she was mean. And that's when I realized like, oh, that's how she expresses herself. And of course, because that's what I was in the environment, that's the environment that I was living in. Somebody said you can't help but get wet if you're swimming in that water. So I got so much. There was an anger. Like you met. We call this more healthy person Evie 2.0. So you know Evie 2.0. Evie 1.0 was mean, B word human being, like a mess of a
Which is
person,
crazy
and
because I
always
can't imagine that.
yeah. And because we hide it well, and like I'm a performer and I achieve and do stuff, and we just hide it, and underneath it was just like pissed chick who had to like was like exploding on the person that I love the most in the world of Matt, my husband. And it was that I was an angry mess. And then but I went to college and I was a journalism major, and then I realized I don't like news. So I was like I better change my major. And I was doing our school's broadcast journalism program, and I was on doing reports on camera. I didn't like that either. And I was like, I want to do behind the scenes stuff instead. So I switched my major to film production. And that's when the whole film thing started. So it was like, and also a shout out to my brother because he was always ahead of it in that, and he has an AV business and everything. So I went to film. I did a film major with an emphasis in motion picture production, and started learning about. There was a job called the unit production manager on films, and I was like, "That's what I want to do." It's like you're the organized person that like um,
But you had
moves
no
everything forward.
You had no aspirations prior
None.
to college of this stuff of where your
Other
career
than
went to.
no, no. Other than just like going to college, I just knew that there was going to be something out there that I was going to get to do. And I used to write for my school newspaper, so maybe I thought I liked writing. I still like writing a lot. Oh, here's another one that's a big part of my life is journaling. So when I was about 12, that's when I started journaling. It was like 94, I think. And that was a huge, that's going to come up in all of my life was the writing. So wherever that all my life went into these like writing it. So so yeah, I had no idea about that was a career, and then I like picked up a book in the library about all the different jobs you can have on a movie, and that sounded like a good one. And
Hmm.
then there was a unit production manager guy who was a guest speaker, and I asked a lot of questions, and then he talked to me after and was like, "Oh, would you want to come on set?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I started with him on like as an intern for free on a commercial um, with Zack Snyder. That was the first director I got to work on. And then he was directing a lot of commercials and stuff. I think it was Chevy or GMC. And then I just like asked a lot of questions, was really like inquisitive child and on the set, and then didn't have a license, Christian. I didn't have a license, so my parents would drop me off in the morning. I'm like 20 years old. And then on one of those days, I missed out on being an extra in one of those because I didn't know how to drive a car. So after that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn how I'm gonna get a license. And I realized that to be a PA, you need a car, like because you're gonna go on runs and all that stuff. So so from that one job, I met everybody else that led to every other job. So it was like
Mm.
I met one of the PAs, Topher, who introduced me to this guy Enrique, who hired me after I graduated from college as an office PA, and then I started like in the office, with a laptop doing coffee runs, and then just moving up in commercials from production assistant, coordinator, and then to production manager. And then at some point when I was production managing, I met a producer who also does features. So I got to do a feature in 2018.
Wow.
And
So
then
what's your like official title now?
well, right now I do. So, and then recently in 2020 I started producing photo shoots because I was working on a commercial with a company, and then they were like, "Oh, do you produce photos shoots?" And I was like, "I guess I could." So I do I produce photo shoots that are marketing related, and also I production supervise commercials. And I production supervise a feature, and that was like production supervisor is the non-union title. So eventually if I wanted to, I would join the Directors Guild and become a unit production manager if I wanted
Wow.
to go that route. hmm So
There's
yeah,
like
and that's
so
what I'm
much in
doing.
there.
There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there.
Well, let me because the last part's probably the most refreshing to whoever's listening. Um, so how normal is someone like you, like your maiden last name, Camacho?
Camacho.
How how normal is a Latin or Hispanic person in the world that you're in? Is it common?
In no, no. In fact, like we worked the one movie that we worked on was Gina Rodriguez was the talent on it, and I shook her hand and I was like, mucho gusto, and she's like, are we the only two Latina women on this? And I was like, yeah, I think so. It's like a crew of like 100 and whatever. And definitely there's been moments where I'm the only woman in the room, like on a
Oh wow.
department head meeting, I'm the only girl, like the DP's a guy, the director's a guy, the I think that one's been more of a thing. The woman thing has been more but it's kind of normal for producers and production supervisors to be women. I think we're just our organized brains are kind of great for that. And so, yeah, sometimes and then being the only Latina is fun. It's like it's a double whammy though. It's like double whammy, triple actually. It's like Christian, Latina in film. Like that's a lot of stuff.
Do
That's a
you
lot of stuff.
feel like I guess not to like apply any pressure, but sometimes we do it ourselves. Do you feel like you're opening doors or you're I don't know, sometimes I feel like in the rooms I'm in, I there's no room for me to fail because there's not a lot of people like me in the room. And if the door closes with me, we basically as a culture have to start over. Do
Yeah.
you feel any of that pressure or you
I
have a
think
different outlook?
my experience might be a little more different because I'm pretty white passing. So I'm like white skin, so hardly anybody ever knows that I'm Latina until I like start speaking Spanish with no accent, or with an accent, with a gringo accent or not a gringo accent. But it more than anything, back to the George Floyd thing, was like all of a sudden, and during that year, the 2016 election, and how, we were hearing all kinds of bad things about Latinos, and I went the opposite way and was like, well, I'm going to start embracing the fact that I'm
Hmm.
Latina and mentioning it. And I would start throwing Spanish around more, or I would talk about, we don't have anybody of color on this, or do you know can we get any girl PAs that are Latina? Or because most of the people that I can hire are the Latina women, and then I got to work on a really cool shoot where it was all women. I think the woman thing has been more for me than the BIPOC part, but the gender thing has been like just trying to break
Hmm.
down the walls and like try to hire more women, or like if I'm like, okay, who would you recommend? I'll like recommend some women, some good women that I know.
Yeah.
Um, and we did do a shoot where it was like all women department heads, and that was a really lovely experience of like seeing what it was like when all women come together and all everybody just, I was like, oh, there's more than of us than I think, but there's still not a lot, like finding a DP or a first assistant camera that was a woman that knows how to load film, like, was really hard.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's been the most, breaking down that door has been a thing. And then the awareness of like the George Floyd thing, about like now you're aware that it's a problem, and that we need more people in the room where it happens. That's
I like
huge.
what you said. So let me tee that up because we before we started jumping on the podcast, Evie and I were talking about, like, she asked me how Be Better started, the podcast started, and I had mentioned how it literally was like a week after the George Floyd incident happened, and for me it was just because there was just so much darkness that was happening on social media, news, every outlet that we had information coming towards us was always dark. And maybe it was my algorithm, maybe it's just because that's we had nothing else to do because of COVID and people were indoors and all you had is your phone. um, my premise would Be Better was if we just can hear each other out, listen to each other, cross each other's lines to see maybe there's a reason why things are this way on this side. And if you just heard me out, maybe you'll understand what my position is as well. And not to justify or remove someone's identity, but to actually just have empathy and hear each other out. But Evie, you told me something about when the lights came on. And I thought that was a perfect analogy of what was happening then.
Yeah, that around the election and the George Floyd protests were like turning on the lights and seeing all the cockroaches. Like none of us knew how in the dark we were about all of these things happening. And like black people knew. It wasn't a surprise to them. They knew. They always knew that there was still a lot of racism in this country, but we had to be illuminated. We had to be taught. We had to learn that it was worse than we thought. Like I was always like always, some people are just born with this like sense of justice, and like that's not right, and just kind of, you had that instinct, and maybe being a person of color already was like, you know what, that sounds racist, like, or you just have a sense for it. But even though I thought myself as a pretty with it kind of person in terms of that, I still had no idea what it was like for black
Right.
people. Like a friend of mine telling me, I was like, hey, I'm just gonna leave these keys in the mailbox for you to pick up later. And she's like, can you tell your neighbors that a black woman's coming, because I don't want them to call the cops on me. And I was like, I never ever would have thought about that. And she lives in that every day.
Yeah.
Like that's something that I had no idea what it was like. And I've talked to a lot of people about it, and we all were like, I had no idea. Like it was a
Right.
reckoning, and we had to know. And before you can move, you need to be educated. So we all had to learn what it was really like, history about riots in the past, and the history of Jim Crow laws and all those things. And once we learn, then we can move forward. But in the beginning, it is a lot of darkness, and it just sounds like everybody's just mad. I've seen so many screenshots in my phone from that time of like Black Lives Matter movement and like learning about it. So first you have to learn before you can move forward. And if you're not listening with an open heart and you just want to be like, no, I don't have privilege, like curiosity, man. Like if you're just going to be hard-hearted about it, then nothing's going to change. You're not going
You
to
had
hear anything.
mentioned how it's almost like a a mess in the kitchen before you clean everything,
Oh
or you have to
yeah.
put everything
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, whenever you organize a pantry, before you can move on, you open the cabinet, you take everything out of that pantry. Like that's the best way to organize. Marie Kondo does that. She makes you take everything out of your closet and pile it all there. And then you see the stuff that is expired and you see the stuff that no longer fits you. Like that's I think that's kind of an analogy to me for of life and growth and change and therapy. And it's like somebody was telling me that their husband was like kind of like, oh, he's really edgy right now because he was going through therapy. And I was like, it's because he's in the messy part of it. They pulled everything out of the cupboard and it's just all spread out. And you're just
Yeah,
gonna look at it and it's like, oh, I don't eat these beans anymore. Like throw them away. And it's funny how we in the growth process we hang on to all this stuff that's expired that no longer serves us. And like I'll tell you one dumb analogy, but um, I was like start during the pandemic and I had a job that was like more stable. I started like washing my face and like putting moisturizer on. And I was like, oh, I should look up moisturizer that's for oily skin. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't have oily skin. I had oily skin when I was a teenager. I have dry skin now. I'm still operating under things that no longer serve me. Like I was still, and I was like, how much of this stuff in my life am I doing that no longer serves me anymore? And that was something that my
wow,
therapist would tell me about was like, you're still like, I would have arguments with my husband and it like takes me back to when I was a kid and I had to fight for myself. And it was like, you don't have to do that anymore. You're not fighting your mom or
yeah,
society or anything. You just have to like take a step back and be like, okay, I'm going into the fight mode,
yeah.
of like I have to stand up for myself. And it's like you don't have to do that anymore. You throw out that expired bean and move on with your life.
So before you can put it all back, you gotta review what you have.
Yep. Yeah. And like for anybody that's listening that's like going through it, therapy was life changing for me for sure. And nobody can push anybody into doing it. And it's something that they kind of have to come to on their own. And I was like, I have friends that are therapists that were studying it. And I was like, oh, therapy's great. People should definitely do that. And like being like, yeah, that's cool for other people. Like I was like, yeah, people should do that. That's great. That's a great idea. And then it wasn't until I kind of hit the bottom of after the election and I had a baby and it was like postpartum depression. I was like at my lowest, like darkest time. And that's when I was like, okay, I think I'm ready. And you're a Ted Lasso fan, but I talk about this scene with my friend who when he walks into Dr. Sharon's office and it's dark
And
and
you're sitting with the
she
pillow.
opens it and he's sitting with the pillow and he stands up and he goes, I want to make an appointment. And
Yeah,
I like when that scene happened, I cried like just tears streaming and I texted my friend. I was like, "You're going to know about that scene." It's just such a perfect example of like I need help. That was that
I'm
when you
ready
get
for
to
help.
that, I'm ready to accept help.
Yeah,
And there's also this really great story, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And I love this line where the boy asks the horse, I think, I'm gonna butcher this. He goes, "What's the bravest thing you've ever said?" And the horse says, "Help."
wow.
And I was like, another one. I cry a lot. I cry a lot, and I'm okay with it. I have feelings now. So the help, asking for help, is like a moment that nobody can push anybody to, and that people will come to that on their own. It's like forgiveness, like you'll know when you're ready and but it's anybody that actually asks for help, like we should help them. And then you should encourage and support and cheer on anybody that asks for help because that's the hardest, bravest thing that they could do. And yeah, it was totally that was the messy when I started therapy. It was very messy. It was like all the junk was all on the counter everywhere. And then it was like I hated going. Every time I had to go, I was like, I don't want to go. I would like, and then I would be mad. And then afterward, I felt so good. I couldn't believe why I was resisting it. And my therapist and I don't think we're like the best fit, like really, but she did, and it was enough that it like started unplugging things of like that I needed to talk about it. And one of the things that I was realized was I know it's a hot topic right now, but this whole like self-love, self-care stuff, it's hot right now. Like
Hmm.
everybody And there's a reason, because it really is good. But like, because I had spent all of my life taking care of my siblings, taking care of everybody else, and now was taking care of two babies, I never took care of me. And I never asked myself, what do you want and what do you need, like, to
Mhm.
be healthy? And I had no idea that like I needed alone time. And I was like, during the pandemic, and well, not during the pandemic, during my son's birth and the election, I was on Twitter all the time. I wasn't journaling. So all of my stuff was not going anywhere. It was like not, and me not being able to do that, I was suffering for like, it wasn't going anywhere. Like all my feelings and stuff, I wasn't processing anything. So we had to put some stuff in place for Evie to do. Which of the be better, the things that have helped me be better was, first I started the therapy work, and that helps you kind of get all of that going. Um, and then the other thing was, Matt and I did marriage counseling in 2020, which, for anybody, even if their marriage is like amazing, like, go anyway. Like, there's something that you guys are fighting about all the time, that it's just the same fight, and you just have to like have a third person help you, you know? And she was
A
amazing. I
professional
called her
third
a
person.
professional third person who's like, yes, don't bring a referee into your brawls in your house.
Because
But I haven't.
I've ran into sometimes where like a friend jumps in, and
Uh-huh.
who's ever side of the friend they're closest to,
Yeah.
they tend to be a little more biased. And it's not bad or good or anything like that, but you can feel isolated if you're the one that's not on the bias side of the friend.
Yeah.
So the
No, it was
professional third person
the
is probably
professional
key.
was, it's so awesome. Like our therapist was so good. I would start calling her a witch, because um she would like just look at me and go, "You have complex trauma." And I was like, "How did you know that?" And she's just like, "The way you look away." She just knew. I was like, "Oh, she's a witch." But no,
In
she's
my
just a good
head, I'd
therapist.
say that in Spanish. I would, bruja.
Yeah, es una bruja. No, I literally said that. Sí, es una bruja. Es una bruja. She knows. She knows too much. But she was great, because it was a third person that was like able to like call us out on our stuff right away. And he's just like, "You have a lot of anxiety about this." And I was like, she knows. And then she just kind of helped us. Like, we couldn't go because the pandemic, we started in 2020, January of 2020. And of course, like, we know what happened
The
then,
shutdown. Yeah.
the shutdown. But like, we went January and February, and I'm like, there's a lot of things that you see, a lot of little God's graces throughout the hard times. And that was the fact that we had started that in January. And by the time that the pandemic happened in March, we had some tools in our tool belt, like with her work and talking, our conversations became so different, and they were like,
Oh, that's
what
cool.
the motivation was behind it. And I don't think we would have survived the pandemic if we hadn't had that, we hadn't gotten a head start with
The
talking
extra help.
about our stuff. Yeah, the extra help of a counselor walking you through how to have a fight, and how to like feel that person, what they're really saying, and like look at their heart and see what's really happening behind it, and be like, oh, okay, I was like, oh, and all of those tools we used for the pandemic, because it was like an intense
You're
time, because
stuck
now
with each
you're
other.
together
Yeah.
all the time. So it was
Yeah.
so different. I think we would have had such a harder time if we hadn't had there, because it was like we would just like acknowledge breaks and things. Yeah.
What I found interesting about the pandemic is kind of forced marriages. I forget what you call it when your kid graduates high school and goes off to college. Empty nester. You
Uh-huh.
you you're when the empty nesting happened, you're forced to see each other because there's no other person to put your focus on. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the pandemic did that to marriage. It's kind of fast tracked that. So
Oh
now
yeah.
you have to face each other. There's no work you have to talk about. There's no this, so and so said this. Like now it's just you guys because there's either you
Mm-hmm.
talk about the pandemic, you talk about the
Mm-hmm.
social divide, or we face each other.
Yep. And you
And
really face
this,
what's going on. That did that for it. That pandemic did that for everything. It was like, okay, if you're not
right,
working, who are you? If you're not out
right.
there achieving things, who are you? If you're not out there hanging out with friends, who are you? It was like putting you in a cave and just leaving you by yourself and figuring out who you are.
But
Which was
it
which was great.
started weird, but it also opens up for you to face you. And I think that's what I take from trauma. I mean, what I take from therapy is that if it, you can't, I can't continue pointing fingers other places. Like one of the things my therapist said that was really like perfect for my story was what happened in your past that created trauma. You were in survival mode, and that was you coping. there's nothing wrong with that, but you're not in survival mode now.
Mm,
So what your past experiences come forward and you're coming from that place. It's not servicing you the same way. And that's why things in your life
100.
don't make sense.
Absolutely. I that was one thing that I remember was like that I would blame my mom for, like, of course I'm angry because that's all I saw, like I saw this like angry person all the time. And then I remembered having a moment where I was like, okay, but your mom is not here right now making you be a bitch to Matt. Like she's not the one that's making you do this. That's you. So it was like, yes, it's not the work starts in here for sure,
Yeah.
inside of you. That's when it was like that was a big reveal of like, oh yeah, maybe she did influence me, but I'm the one that's making the decisions every day. And then at some point you're like, it could be better than this, which is what my friend Allison was like, it could be so much better. You don't have to be living
Right.
with that trauma all the time. It could be so much better. And she gave me great advice with when starting. She was like, if you don't like the therapist, if you don't feel like you vibe with that therapist, like go to another one. Like she
Fine.
was like,
Yeah.
don't, just find one that does fit. And be open to be surprised, because maybe you think you want a guy, but actually a girl works better for you, or you
Right.
don't want anybody that's a believer, but then the believer actually turns out to be better for you. So like open mind with therapy for
I
sure.
had a great example that was shared with me. You know the example of it takes two to tango.
Hmm.
It, we use it relationally, but sometimes that's just you as well. So the old me was tangoing with something that didn't need to tango anymore.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's a like a almost like a conclusion. Like I no longer need to dance that dance no more. So I'm making a decision to stop the dance. And now I need to dance with something else. I need to move on to something that could be better, should be better for my
Yeah,
life. And I think
for
that's where
sure.
the self care gets a little weird for people because self care goes into that
Yes.
self help and all that stuff. But
Yeah, yeah. It was kind of like it's a needs based thing, like what you actually need, and everybody has different needs. So one of the things that I realized that I need a lot is alone time, because that's how I used to process the days. Like I would be at school doing things, and then I was in a house full of noise, and at night when it was just me and my journal and quiet, like that, I needed that, like to be. I'm super like not shy and extroverted, and everybody thinks that naturally I'm like always, that's how I refresh. But no, it's like when I'm quiet, or like in nature, or reading a book, or at a museum, or like that's really a deep need for me. And I remember during the pandemic, especially, was like, oh, what are all the things that give me joy? And it was like a list of all the things that I couldn't do. Was like go to a museum, hang out with friends, have coffee, have
right,
a meaningful conversation with a friend is a huge part of it. And it was like, nope, can't do any of that. So it that when you realize like those kind of needs, and when you get those little needs met, um, you're so much better for everybody else. Like we talked about that with a mom friend of mine, that was like, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first.
right,
When the plane's going down, you have to put on the oxygen mask before you can help anybody else. And and she would always say to me if I was sick or something, she'd be like, Evie, you're no good to your family dead. So
right.
just take care of yourself. Like moms will sacrifice themselves for the family or people in the heads of the households. But you have to put on your own oxygen mask. And like my we have a amazing weird dynamic in our family where my husband's home with the kids and I'm the one that works full time, well, when I'm employed, please God. But I do a lot of the like emotional taking care of the family still, so like he'll handle like the house and runs the ship and everything, and then but I wasn't taking care of me either. So we started during the pandemic, we started something that was really helpful, which definitely helped us be better, was we used to do I used to do homeschool with the kids, or like some sort of semblance of a homeschool, and I was getting really burnt out. And the same friend Allison, I was like, I'm so exhausted, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, like is there a way you and him could take turns? And I was like, oh, we should take turns. And so we did this thing where it was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I would do the mornings, and then he would be off in the mornings, or like I was off in the mornings and he
So he
was off
gets
in the
his me time as
afternoons.
well.
So I would get alone time. And then that's when I learned that I have to schedule rest. I have to
Mm,
schedule time for myself, because otherwise I won't do it. And it was because I'm an achiever and I work hard and everything, that I'll just keep working around the clock. Like even if I'm not working, I'm like working on something. I'm like organizing or planning a party or something or something. And then it was like, oh, I have to schedule a rest, which is like we also started practicing Sabbath a lot more. And that's like, and I started learning about Sabbath and how beautiful that is. It's like a day of rest and pleasure and joy and art and walking, and it's not about like leisure at the expense of
Another
another
thing to do.
person's
Yeah.
labor. And it's a beautiful time that God made, because all life is cycles and rhythms and so I could have like a list of all the books that changed my life about like learning about the rhythms of life and everything. And that one was like, okay, so we try to do Sabbath. And then we have this thing in my family that every Sunday night is solo Sunday. And
Mm.
I have alone time in my home office, which is like a cute little lady cave, and I'll watch Golden Girls or something fun, or I'll read, or I'll write, or whatever it is, but it's just my time. So no matter what happened during the week, if I had, right now I have copious amounts of time for myself. But if I'm working a lot, I always take that time, and it's on the calendar, like in our calendar weekly, that I have dedicated alone time, just me. And no matter what happens, that I know that that's the way that I end the week before I start a new week. I'm like refreshed and calm, and I'm like in such a better mood and in such a better place by doing that. And then my husband and I have a thing where we do meaningful Mondays, and we don't watch TV. We just talk, we hang out, we drink tea, we read
Almost like a date
together.
night, basically.
It's a date night, but it's like because
Meaningful.
otherwise otherwise you kind of get stuck in this like, let's watch, another episode of Battlestar Galactica or whatever you're gonna do. So you start realizing that you do
Of
that
all
a
shows, that's the
well,
one.
so Battlestar Galactica. It's a Portlandia thing reference, but whatever you're gonna do, that you'll just get distracted, and like a lot of Matt and I always say that marriage is a tiny nonprofit organization, and
Okay.
I'm the CEO and he's the CFO, and it's a lot of it. You start talking about administration, administration, administration. What are the kids
And
doing?
that's
Where are
all
we
you
going?
think
What's
about.
on the calendar? That's all you talk about, and then you don't connect on like, how are you, and just what's going on with you, and so having it a dedicated time. And I've told a few people, even like I totally was so flattered because I mentioned that to like somebody who's been married for like I don't know how many years, like 30 years, and she's like an example of how, a good marriage. And I told her that idea, and she's like, you know what, I totally stole that idea of yours, and now we we do that, and then we have like a day where we both practice a foreign language together, and she like added
Oh,
a few
wow.
other things to the
That's
thing. I was like,
cool.
oh, that's great. But it like, because then you know that there's always that sacred time that you protect for each other, then you don't have to worry about it. And Matt has this great thing he learned from somewhere called discipline equals freedom. So because
Hmm.
we're disciplined in doing that, that means that we're free to not have to worry about when are we going to get some quality time. It's like, oh, I know when. Monday night. It's you and me
Yeah,
time, you know?
that's
So
good.
that was a good
There,
one.
there's a few things. So there's a because I can almost hear the Christians listening saying like self care and self help. So there's an equation that I think sometimes we forget that the Bible talks about, which is the top two commandments, but we hear top two and we think there's only two. It's to
Mm-hmm.
love God and love people as ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
that's three. Love God, love people, and love people as yourself. What happens if you don't know how to love yourself? How
Mm-hmm.
are you going to love your neighbor? The only way that you're loving yourself is the way you're going to love your neighbor. And I think that sometimes is the bridge we need to cross. Is it's not a matter of being selfish. It's a matter of I need these things that God knows I'm wired for, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
humanity thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
God
Mm-hmm.
wants me to have this rest. It's not a for selfish purposes. And if I have this rest, what comes with it? I'm no good to
Mm-hmm.
people if I have no rest. If
Jesus
I'm just
himself did it.
yeah, and he would isolate himself so
Yeah,
that he can
he
get that
40
rest.
days. Like he would be like, I'm gonna go take a nap. You guys steer this ship. Like he was a human in a human body and he had to rest. And like we were talking about love, one of the books that like also changed my life was this book called All About Love by Bell Hooks. And she had the chapter was about self-love, was like, holy crap. She talked about how did I she said this is the hardest chapter of this book to write, about self loving myself, because I dreamed of having somebody love me as I was, a bigger black woman in this body. And how was I going to accept and learn how somebody else would love me if I didn't love myself as that person?
Right.
And I was like, like I was already kind of like, uh, it, trying to thinking about that concept about how, like, do you love yourself, or like that thing about love yourself, and knowing yourself is a big part of that love of like,
Right.
that's how I am, and that's how I'm wired, and that's how God made me. And he didn't make a mistake making you the way that he made you, or they, and then when I was reading that book, the Bell Hooks book, it was like self-care, self-love, and do something. And I did something that I really had always wanted to do, which was to take a trip by myself. So
Hmm.
I went on a cabin by myself, and that started another thing that helps us, is that I take a trip by myself every year, um, around October, and I go for 2 nights to like a cabin, usually in Big Bear. And then I'm just by myself. And there's something about being alone where you don't have to worry about anybody else. You're just thinking about, what do you want to do and what do you like
Right.
to do. And some moms are like, oh my gosh, you actually left for two. And I'm like, I'm so lucky because I trust Matt implicitly. He does everything. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna take off, and the family's gonna be fine without you, and you take care of your soul, and you take care of what you need. And one of those things was, I would starting to practice a lot the discipline of silence, of just sitting
Mm.
somewhere and like
That was hard
listening
for
to
me still.
God. Oh my gosh, still. For me, that I'm trying to practice now, and I'm failing right now, is the listening more. I'm just like being quiet. I guess this is the right place to talk about myself though, I guess. But anyway, so I went and I got up to the little mountain, and I was like, it was like a tiny hike. And it was, I stood on the mountain, and I didn't have anything, like no headphones, no podcasts, nothing. It was just me, God, nature. And I was like just looking out at the void, and like for 30 minutes I was just like quiet, and I heard a voice, the voice of the Holy Spirit, or the voice inside go, you're waiting for somebody to tell you that you're a better person, that you're healthy now. Like, you're waiting for a certificate and a gold star. Like, stop going into that cave and fighting that bear. It's
Hmm.
time to move on. It's time to move on from this. And I was like, am I better now? I don't know. And I kept trying to mine all that hard stuff, and it was like, no, you're okay. And the next day I went on another hike, and I saw a family, and I was like, how far does this trail go? And he's like, the guy's like, oh, this trail goes on forever. Like, you just kind of keep going. It's like a very long trail. And then the mom goes, you just go as far as you want and turn around. And
Dang.
I was like, okay. And then I heard God say, it's time to climb another mountain. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not like perfect, but it was like, you've hit a plateau. It's time to go on to the other thing. But that revelation would never have happened if I hadn't make carved out that
Looked in.
dedicated
Yeah.
time, and just was quiet. Like, I just like sat there and was just like, and it took a long time for me to settle and to be like,
Because it's new.
okay,
Yeah. It's
it's
something new you're
new.
trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was important. That was a really one that keeps me, is that kind of stuff. So now it's like, I call it just maintenance nowadays, is making sure that I have enough quality alone time, and then I have quality time with friends, and it's just like trying not to fall back. And I struggle with depression, and it's winter, and winter's like hard for me, and like around my birthday I always get kind of depressed. So I was like, okay, what can I do to attack this? Like, because
Yeah.
sometimes there's nothing that can be done, and you're just like starting to fall, and you're just hoping for, what I say, a soft landing and a quick kickoff. Like, I was like, if I'm falling, and I'm hoping that I'm gonna land and soft. And then to me that looks like, okay, I spent one day in bed and then I got out. um so yes, you were going to ask me about the hard times. So now the fact that it's been a year of like I worked very little last year, and I told my friend, I was like, you know what my biggest accomplishment last year was? That I got out of bed every day. That was my
Mm.
biggest accomplishment, was that I got out of bed every day. And I think it's because I'm pretty sure it's because I have a security in who I am outside of my job now. Like, I'm not who what I do. Like, I'm secure in that
Did you
I'm
struggle with that
loved.
before?
I think so. I think it's a lie that depression is a liar. It just, it's a dementor that just wants to drag you down and steal your soul, and
Stupid Dementor, son.
Stupid Dementor is just trying to suck your soul out. And I think JK said that that's what the analogy of that Dementor was for depression. And I still am like, I'm fighting these Dementors with my Patronuses, all the Patronuses I have. I'm gonna bust them out. I'm like, oh, taking a walk every day, going out in the sun, like having coffee with friends, and the depression is a liar, and it wants to tell you that you're worthless and that you're no good to anybody. And the way to fight it is other people, and to remember that you're loved by God and your family, and you hopefully love yourself too, to want to get up every day and do something. And it's yeah, I think that's the biggest miracle of last year, was the fact that we had that I had done the work, and that we kept trying, and that I had a lot of support and love from family, and that we kept going. And the kids keep you busy because they don't care. They're just,
Yeah.
and they're so fun, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna keep waking up and doing this with you guys, and we're gonna get out of this
Yeah.
darkness together.
So to wrap this up, because we're going into this, I want to respect your time. I want to ask, out of, maybe, I don't know if you created a theme or something that you practically tell yourself or coach yourself right now, since, because as a producer, you're in and out of jobs. It's not like an everyday job, like 9 to 5, like other people might have. So you have to kind of walk yourself through, which can lead you to that space. What is it that you can tell the listeners? What's something that you practice, not in being a perfect person, but a person that is working intentionally on yourself to be a better person, a better version of yourself?
Uh, I think a big help is knowing yourself, and knowing the things that are good for you, and knowing what things bring you life and what things take it away from you. So, one of the things does take me out, that does take me down, is social media. So I deleted that last year. So I haven't
Mm.
had it for a year. So I took that out. So knowing what things to toss and what things to keep and what things to lean for. And pinning those important things in your life that are a priority for you, and like putting them on the calendar, like literally write down walk, and then put it on your calendar for 30 minutes, and then put it, like, repeat it every Wednesday or whatever you're going to do. But like having it on the calendar, or visual, like a visual of it reminds you, even in the hard times, that you're prioritizing yourself and your soul, so that you could be better for other people, because otherwise you won't do it. Like, this
Right.
is the tiniest little discipline that you can do, of like, pick a day that you can just, that's your day and that's your time, and just keep trying at it. And then also, like, learning how to be quiet and listening, sometimes waiting at the store and just like, no, don't look at your phone, and just kind of have a moment with yourself, and check in. And like, I'm reading this book called Permission to Feel, and he says, like, that after we'll do these meetings, I know it's a really fun concept, like, just, I'll give you permission to feel. But he says, like, we'll go through a meeting, and then we'll just move on to the next thing. And you just, like, take a minute and be like, how did that make me feel? And like, my friend said that she puts her hand on her chest and was like, that was hard. That was hard to do. Or, oh, that was really fun. Or something. And like, she'll just touch herself
Check
and
in.
like
Yeah.
hold her arm and just be like, that was good. Or that was hard. And just acknowledging that stuff. I think that's a really good, that's how I survived this craziness. um, yeah, it's just pinning the important things, checking the
I, I,
rest.
I reacted to your permission to feel, because that's a big reason why I want to have guests on here, is because I think sometimes we need permission that we don't know we need. If we hear
Mm-hmm.
from somebody else in their story and how they went from this place in their life to this place now in their life, sometimes we just need that permission to hear from somebody else. And then the feeling part, I think women are better, generally speaking, in feeling, but the guys that are listening, let
Yeah,
yourself
because we
feel
have
feelings.
permission. We have
You have
permission. We're
permission.
like, society allows us to cry, and like, you guys don't have permission. They're like, no, you can't cry. That's an unmanly or
but
whatever. Yeah.
but the truth is, we all hit a crossroad, guys. We all hit a crossroad where we can either just push it down the surface where we don't have to face it, but eventually it comes up. Whatever you think you're
Mm-hmm.
not feeling, you are feeling it. You're just not processing it. And I
Mm-hmm.
know for me, when I didn't know I needed permission, that I just needed it for myself. I didn't need it from somebody else. I
Yep.
just didn't know
Yep.
how to.
Yeah.
And
That's the
I
biggest one.
remember a time where I didn't know, I didn't know how to identify what I was feeling. And the person I trust the most in my life is my wife. And she asked me if everything was okay. And my honest answer was, I don't know. And she said, what are you feeling? I said, I don't know. And then I just lost it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just surfaced what I was feeling, but I didn't know how to process. And it's part
Mm-hmm.
of my therapy that I go through is identifying feelings. So
Mm-hmm.
so that I don't pass the not allowing or not having permission to feel to if my wife and I ever have kids. That's the last thing I want them to feel how I felt.
Yeah. The you weren't you just had to survive. Like all your life was just survival, 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 and nobody can really process until you're out of the survival, you know? And
Right.
some people like well might never get out of it. They're always just trying to survive. So now it's kind of like the foresight is comes from after. It's like you're like, hey, now I'm okay. Now I'm safe. I can do that. You know, like now you're safe. You have a loving relationship. Now you have permission to do this. And the biggest person you have to get the permission from is you, for
Yeah.
sure. Like you have to acknowledge it for yourself. And like I know that this kind of work is like some people it's harder. For some people it's harder than others of like what do you want in life? And I could write like my husband said his nightmare is like giving a blank piece of paper and saying write about whatever you want. He's like that's my nightmare. And like some of
Yeah.
us are like I have these goals and I have this thing and it might be harder for others, but if you feel like there's something missing or like you don't know what it is or there's this pit that's like bugging you or something, get curious and start exploring that and like what is this about and um and having a humility to acknowledge that we don't know and that we're open
That's
to
my
help.
that's my word for I don't do resolutions, but I just pray or ask God to give me a theme or a word to kind of practice or lean on when things get tough or something to be intentional about. And that word curiosity is what I got for this year.
Hmm.
Just be
Huge.
curious, try it out. You won't know. It's
Hmm.
kind of the idea of when kids, I've done this where I say I don't like a food and then they ask me, have I tried it? And I say no. How?
Hmm.
You don't know
How
you
are you
don't
gonna
like it.
know? Yeah. How are you gonna
So
know?
it's being
Yeah.
intentional about curiosity.
Curiosity is huge. I mean, that changes the game. The imagination is where freedom is. Like you're the most free in your imagination, and you can't tap into that until you're curious.
Intentional.
And
Yeah.
like you said about the George Floyd thing and all of that was like curiosity is more powerful. Like just being like, what's it like being a cop? What's it like being a black person? What's it like being a white man in America nowadays? Like just be curious about what they're really going through. And empathy, huge empathy is like
Because that's what
it
leads to
doesn't mean
empathy.
like I feel bad about it. It's like, oh, I trying to imagine what it's like. It like imagine being putting on that skin and walking in the day and walking into a store and what would it be like? And like just putting yourself in that place is that's empathy.
Yeah. Well, young lady, thank you for your time. Really appreciate
Thank
you coming on.
you for
This
having
was fun.
me. This is fun.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we talked about feelings and we survived.
And we survived. That's life goals right there. You can feel and you'll survive. All right. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Christian. Love you, bro.
Bye.
Bye.